Noon sun of California poured through the tall windows of the United States Marine Corps Recreation Room at Camp Henderson, casting long, warm shadows across the polished linoleum floor. Private First Class Gomer-Pyle sat quietly, a gentle smile on his face, enjoying a rare moment of weekend tranquility. The base was relatively quiet, a stark contrast to the usual cacophony of marching boots and shouting drill instructors. Most of the men were out on pass, leaving behind a peaceful stillness that reminded Gomer just a little bit of a lazy Sunday back in Mayberry, North Carolina. His peaceful reverie was interrupted when a fellow Marine leaned through the doorway. The Marine told Gomer that he had a visitor waiting for him. A visitor? Gomer was genuinely puzzled. He did not know many people on this side of the country. The Marine added, with a chuckle, that Gomer should not get his hopes up for a romantic encounter, as the lady waiting was distinctly the motherly type. The motherly type, Gomer thought, scratching his chin in bewilderment. He walked down the corridor, his boots echoing softly against the walls, wondering who in the world could be paying him a call. As he rounded the corner into the visitor area, his eyes widened in sheer delight. Standing there, radiating the comforting, unmistakable warmth of home, was none other than Aunt Bee. Gomer let out a joyous shout, his voice echoing with pure, unfiltered happiness. Aunt Bee turned, her eyes lighting up as she saw the young man approaching. She reached out, her hands clasping his warmly, her eyes scanning him from head to toe in absolute astonishment. She could hardly believe her eyes. When Gomer had left their quiet little town of Mayberry, he had been a frail, scrawny boy, all elbows and knees, working down at the filling station. But standing before her now was a remarkably transformed young man. The rigorous military training had broadened his shoulders, straightened his posture, and filled him out. He looked strong, healthy, and, as Aunt Bee happily declared, genuinely handsome. Gomer blushed a deep shade of red, a bashful grin spreading across his face. He assured her that he was still the exact same Gomer underneath the sharp uniform. Aunt Bee beamed with pride, adjusting her lovely traveling dress, and told him he looked absolutely wonderful. The joyous reunion bubbled with questions and laughter. Gomer eagerly asked when the world had brought her all the way out to California. Aunt Bee explained that she was en route to Fresno. Her niece, Judy May Olander, was getting married. Aunt Bee happily shared the details, noting that her niece had made a very good match. The groom was a hard-working young fellow who worked as a butcher down at the local supermarket. Aunt Bee, with a knowing sparkle in her eye, mentioned the reliable income such a profession brought, but quickly added that, above all else, he was known to be a truly lovely person. At first, Aunt Bee had hesitated to make such a long journey, but Andy had insisted. He had told her that she desperately needed a vacation from her endless household chores, a chance to step away from the kitchen and the dusting and just enjoy herself. Taking his advice to heart, she decided to turn the trip into a proper vacation and make a special detour to see her dear friend Gomer. Gomer was overwhelmed with gratitude. It meant the world to him that she would go out of her way to visit. He eagerly asked about everyone back home in Mayberry, Andy, little Opie, and all the familiar faces he missed so dearly. Aunt Bee assured him that everyone was doing wonderfully and promised she had brought a whole album full of photographs to show him. She suggested they head into town, find a nice quiet place for dinner, and have a long, comfortable talk to catch up properly. A shadow of disappointment briefly crossed Gomer's face. He rubbed the back of his neck, his polite Southern manners making him feel terrible for declining. He explained that he would love nothing more than to go into town with her, but he simply could not, because all the other fellows in his platoon were out on weekend passes. Gomer had been assigned to barracks duty. Aunt Bee, never one to be easily deterred, immediately offered a solution. If Gomer had to stay and work, she would simply accompany him. They could visit and talk right there while he completed his chores. Gomer hesitated, pondering the rules, but figured that since it was Sunday and the barracks were entirely empty, There would be no harm in letting her keep him company. Ampy was thrilled. She linked her arm through his as they walked toward the living quarters, still marveling aloud at how incredibly handsome and grown up he had become. When they arrived at the barracks, Ampy stopped in the doorway, her eyes scanning the vast, open room filled with perfectly aligned metal bunks and identical green lockers. Gomer proudly led her down the center aisle, gesturing to a specific bed and the locker standing right beside it. He announced that this was his home. Ampy looked around, a touch of dismay in her voice, and asked if that tiny space was all he had. She confessed she had assumed he would have earned a private room by now. Gomer chuckled, explaining that a soldier had to be much higher up in the ranks to earn such a luxury. Ampy noted the complete lack of privacy, her motherly instincts bristling at the austere conditions. Gomer admitted that it had been difficult to adjust to at first, sharing a sleeping space with so many other men, listening to their snoring and rustling. But time had changed his perspective. Now, he felt a deep sense of camaraderie and brotherhood. In fact, he had grown so accustomed to the shared space that he doubted he could ever sleep comfortably in a silent, empty room by himself again. Ampy sighed, philosophically observing that human beings really could get used to just about anything. Curious about his responsibilities, she asked what exactly his barracks duties entailed. Gomer listed them off with a sense of honest pride. He had to mop the long stretch of floor, dust the tops and insides of the lockers, wash the windows until they sparkled, and just generally spruce the place up to pass inspection. Aunt Bea's jaw dropped slightly. She stared at him and flatly stated that what he was describing was housework. Gomer offered a modest nod, agreeing that one could certainly call it that. Aunt Bee was astounded that he was expected to do all of this manual cleaning entirely by himself. Gomer quickly clarified that normally all the fellows pitched in and cleaned their own respective areas. But since they were out enjoying their weekend passes, and he had no other pressing plans, he had volunteered to take care of the entire barracks for them. Aunt Bee was utterly bewildered. The idea that these brave, tough military boys were required to scrub floors and wash windows on top of all their marching, drilling, and rigorous physical training seemed absurd to her. She asked how long the military had been operating this way. Gomer, with innocent sincerity, guessed it had probably been going on for about 200 years. Ampy shook her head in disbelief, remarking that one would think the government could spare a few extra dollars to hire a proper maid for these hard-working boys, refusing to sit idly by while someone else did chores. She told Gomer to fetch her a sweater or a jacket to protect her nice dress, find something to cover her hair, and hand her a mop. Gomer panicked. He pleaded with her, insisting that she could not possibly help him clean a military barracks. But Ampy possessed a stubborn streak born of decades of running a household. She commanded him not to argue with her and to simply do as she asked. Despite his nervous protests, Gomer soon found himself outmatched. Within minutes, Ampy was wearing a surplus military jacket over her dress, her hair wrapped up, expertly pushing a wet mop across the linoleum. As she worked, she voiced her continued bafflement at the United States military budget. She could not comprehend how a government that collected millions upon millions in taxes refused to allocate a few dollars to have a professional cleaning woman come in and set things right. She noted that back in Mayberry, Mavis Pearl would gladly come in on a Thursday and clean a space like this perfectly for a mere $8. Gomer tried to explain the military philosophy, gently suggesting that it was not a matter of money at all. Doing the chores, maintaining discipline in one's living space, taking pride in a clean floor, it was all fundamentally part of being a Marine. Ampy huffed, unpersuaded by the logic. She firmly believed they could make a few sensible changes. A woman's touch, she argued, would make a world of difference. She pointed out that the bare windows desperately needed some cheerful curtains, and a few nice pictures on the walls certainly would not hurt the grim atmosphere. Gomer politely mentioned that some of the fellows did keep pictures, but they were strictly confined to the inside doors of their lockers. Ampy paused, reading between the